Jason brought this to my attention today, and I'm actually like really upset over this. So if for people who have been following my work for a while, I'm based here in Philly. My initial, awakening to what was really going on had to do with the public schools and following money around school closures that happened here in 2013 with Boston Consulting Group. And I did a lot of work. I tried to do a lot of work locally in my community around my concerns around data surveillance and educational technology and impact finance linked to that data in Philadelphia. And I just found it very difficult because for the most part, a lot of the families, understandably, like their main focus was how can I figure out a way to work the system for my family in a very difficult, educational setting. The teachers were all overworked, and the ones who had the wherewithal and the energy to do more organizing, they were trying to gain power through union organizing. And so for the most part, I didn't really get anywhere. I didn't make a lot of progress. I still haven't made a lot of progress in those people. They're still doing the same stuff that they were doing 7 years ago. And so I moved on, and I connected with Sherry Honkala, who leads the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. And she is a housing rights activist in Kensington, which is the center of the opioid crisis in Philadelphia. And I was like, the same playbook is being used for impact finance, not just against kids in their schools, but against in people suffering from addiction, in recovery and homelessness and poor people. And so let me see, maybe I can try to, make myself useful in other areas. And, and I learned a lot. And the thing is, Philadelphia is a center, an epicenter of heroin. I pulled about a 3-minute clip out of this. This is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and he's in some interview recently with Dr. Drew talking about setting up recovery centers, like a national system of recovery centers tied to the Peace Corps. And I don't think I actually included this part, but he sort of alludes to this idea that people who suffer from addiction, that it is that they're seeking, they lack something in themselves and they're seeking spirituality or they're seeking something beyond themselves. And I would say, while I don't dismiss that it's it may be some of that, I think we have to understand that the opioid epidemic and the heroin crisis was manufactured by industry. That's very, very clear by now, including pharmaceutical companies that are involved in all the things that we're opposing, right? Johnson and Johnson included. And so there was an intention to create systems of addiction for dispossession to advance this larger agenda. It didn't just happen. It didn't just happen because people were weak or people were bad. The painkiller prescriptions were done on purpose, and the recovery centers are something that's really, I've talked about this with my friend Brandy. We were looking at Florida, and Florida being a center for the recovering industry, which he does note as being predatory. But the opioid crisis was a setup for impact investing. And this is a presentation that I did in the fall of 2019 for PPERC. And the title of it was Pay for Success Finance and the Opioid Crisis, Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, Radical Social Work Breakfast Presentation. And so I was trying to talk about how these markets were being set up around addiction. And the feature image on this blog post is a report from the Obama administration in 2016 called Deploying Pay for Success Model to Help Address the Opioid Epidemic in the U.S., an Opportunity for State and Local Action. All right. And so So this is a thing, and it was done on purpose. It was constructed on purpose. I have a whole slide deck here for people who want to spend some time, and I'll link to the map, and you can look for this. But I did a whole presentation, and then later on, I wrote another article called "The Opioid Crisis in Connecticut." And again, Connecticut and Northern New Jersey are where all the hedge funds are based, and this was done in conjunction with Yale, and the investors in this impact market were included BNP Paribas, who I think Andrew Peck was a consultant to, and like an Australian insurance company. Like global multinational corporations were investing in this deal that was targeting single mothers suffering from addiction who had their children were, identified for like family intervention services, right? And for this, in the metrics, all it was like Yale had done some sort of like minimal amount of therapeutics, and here, go pee in a cup, and if you stay clean for 90 days or something, then the deal gets paid out. And none of it was actually about like facilitating people to get totally clean off the thing. And the reality is most of these women were making minimal amounts of money that they couldn't even support a family. And at the end of the programs, none of those circumstances, none of their material circumstances had changed. And so it's just really tragic. And so I'm going to play this first. And see what.
I mean, my history is I was a drug addict myself for 14 years, from beginning right after my dad died when I was 15 years old. And so I've been, I've been thinking about sobriety for 40 years. And I see what's happening in this country now, this dramatic expansion of opioid deaths. We now, I think last year, had 106,000 opioid deaths. That's almost twice of the number of kids that were killed in the Vietnam War, in 20-year Vietnam War, but we're killing that many every year. One of the things I'm going to do, Drew, which is going to be my Peace Corps program, that in analogy for my uncle's Peace Corps program, is I'm going to launch a series of healing centers all across our country. As you know, the recovery industry in this country is a very large industry. It may be as big as $42 billion a year. But it's very predatory in many senses. And we need to be able to and it's very expensive, get treatment. And when I first got sober, I would take people up to a place called High Watch Farms in Connecticut, which was started by the founders of AA and Bill Wilson and his friends. And then it was handed over to another group because AA was not allowed by its own charter to own anything. But this place, I could bring people to. There was no physician on staff, but it was basically barracks that were very pleasant.
It was basically barracks that were very pleasant. I just want to reinforce that. Basically barracks that were very pleasant.
But they went to meetings and people got treatment, and you could do it for $75 a week. Major initiatives is to go to rural areas in this country and build these facilities, partner with 501c3s, with charitable organizations.
Again, build the facilities, partner with 501c3s.
And, build facilities that kids can go to with mental illness.
No, he's also adding mental illness, so that kids can go to with mental illness. So think about what he's been saying about chronic illness. And I think that mental illness and addiction is going to be lumped in with the chronic illness.
There's a place that I've visited many times that it's kind of a model for the way I'm thinking about this. Yeah. In Italy, called San Patrignano, and the only requirement for going there is that you commit to 5 years. It's absolutely free, and we do organic.
You have to commit to 5 years, okay? 5 years.
Farming, and they teach skills. They have bakeries and furniture factories, and they are basically self-sufficient. And it is so successful over there. There's 2,000 kids who live there.
So think about this again. Here, I'm gonna back. So I want to point this out. So you've got a confined group of people for 5 years doing free labor, right? And to me, this sounds like a haul-on. This sounds like an experimental test bed for behavior management. I mean, it has been in the past. Like, we know that if you look at the Skinner model, the token engineering model, that came out of institutional settings, both for mental health and carceral settings, which, these recovery centers kind of are. Now, he's papering it over with this idea of, you can do organic farming and that sort of thing. But the reality is that these centers, you're not allowed to leave. You commit And I'm going to show you, there's a lot more to the story of like this model that he's talking about. But imagine several thousand people. It's like a small town under the control of, a managing system, right? Possibly all of this is in alignment with social impact finance. And I would just say, remember, a week or so ago when I was talking about Michael Baum and his connection with Operation Snow White and the Scientologists and their promoting of Crimenon and Narcanon and their recovery models, right? Like this stuff, all these pieces are starting to like click together in not a good way. Sorry, let me
stay as long as they want. They stay a minimum of 5 years, and they come out completely changed.
They come out completely changed. So I think that is probably the case. Okay, so a little bit more about the model that he's talking about. So it's called Patrignano, and I see Jason's there. Yes, thanks, Jason. Like I was planning on doing this talk today, and like, oh my gosh, then I was like, oh, now I have to spend an hour and a half like looking into all of this stuff. But this is really big and it's important because again, like it matters. Like having access, like this is largely a manufactured crisis of addiction, right? I will say it's also kind of weird because the crisis of addiction is also following in parallel to this major push for psychedelic drugs, including pay for success finance for trauma treatment or whatever. So you've got like this weird mix of like all kinds of like stuff going on, right? And Charles Eisenstein pushing the psychedelic drugs. And then you've got like the addiction management. And then you've got these captive communities that are like being managed for impact, right? For free labor. It's like a labor work camp. They're barracks, but they're very nice. They don't mind being there. So you get these people addicted. Then, and again, just like the war on crime, like the drug war, a lot of that was to manage the global labor supply. Like they wanted people incarcerated who would otherwise be unemployed because then once they were in a carceral setting, they could make money off of them. They could get them to work for free. They could get them to their families to like buy into all of these services, phone calls, like predatory things, in the prison systems. You could make money off of prisoners, right? So this feels to me like the next iteration of that. Okay, so we know we're going to have the fourth industrial revolution. We know there's going to be, we'd like to get everybody with a digital wallet, right? And I'd like to have a lot of people incapacitated. Oh, by the way, like maybe we can incapacitate them with certain kind of drugs, and then we can facilitate their quote unquote healing with other kinds of drugs that take them to altered states of spiritual consciousness. And then maybe we can get some nanotech in there and access, some collective into subconscious problem solving. It sounds like a bizarre movie. Like someone should write that. This probably already a movie. But so San Patrignano is the model, the Italian model that he's talking about. Like, look, don't they look like they're having a great time? It seems like they're probably in a laundry room, like doing laundry. I don't know. This looks like fabric, but the other stuff looks like laundry. So about them, so they are a community that welcomes people in addiction, offers a new life for the family of people suffering. Now, early on, this thing dates to the late 1970s, and I don't know if that's the case now, but in the 1970s, like you couldn't see your loved one for the first year. Like they were just gone. And like, who knows what would happen to them in that time? Like you couldn't see what happened to them. Like, so yeah. So the families, like, send the people off. And again, I know that like, this is an important need. I'm not discounting the need for services, but just wait, like it gets better. So literally like this is what, so it turns out that in 2021, Netflix actually did like a 5-part series on the terrible conditions of this exact program that was started in 1979. And like the funders who are in this picture, the woman was the former mayor of Milan, and her husband was an oil, had inherited an oil company from his father and was like a billionaire in the oil industry, right? And they're bankrolling the creation of this communal intentional treatment community. So yeah, it says Letizia and Gianmarco Moratti. Their commitment to San Patrignano has always been accompanied by great discretion, right? Yes. And the choice this time to do an interview is another proof of the love for the boys because the Netflix series that has rekindled the spotlight on the controversial figure of Vincenzo Muccioli, and on the past of San Patrignano, a very distant past in reality in terms of historical, social, and cultural context, has struck above them all. The boys who will come back again and again in this chat with Letizia Moratti. So she's still involved. Like she was they were the original money. So they say, oh, that's the distant past, but it's the same people. Like it's literally the same people. So the series, if you want to look it up, it's called SanPa, Sins of the Savior. A tale of a community of people recovering from addiction takes a dark turn. San Patrignano, founded in 1978 near Rimini, Italy. And it's interesting because Rimini, the closest town is, it's actually the country of San Marino, which is kind of a weird San Marino is this tiny country inside of Italy, like Vatican City. It seems like there's got to be something going on with San Marino and Rimini. It became known as the country's most notorious drug rehab. The Netflix series has rekindled a long-standing debate in Italy about the methods promoted by the San Patrignano founder Vincenzo Muccioli, who died in 1995. It also illuminated a community whose existence helped shape Italian drug laws as they stand today. So this was very influential, right? And like literally, Bobby, the Netflix series on this was like in 2021. Like it wasn't a long time ago. Like you're literally promoting something that, and again, I'm sure Netflix, I'm not saying that it didn't have its own agenda and that some of this stuff is, incendiary to get eyeballs, but the stuff happened, right? Like the stuff that I'm going to talk about, like it did happen. As SanPa recounts, what began as a small family-run farm, and there we've got the whole permaculture thing, soon grew into a self-contained town. Most of the buildings were built without permits. It housed businesses, homes, a canteen, and a hospital. Such growth was made possible by huge donations, but also by unpaid labor of scores of young drug users, many of whom tried to escape only to be thwarted by community security. And so then, like, later on, it went into, they would kidnap people who tried to get away, right? And all of the buildings were built, like, and again, these rich people who are behind it, like, they acted with such discretion. Here's the Wikipedia on Gianmarco Moratti, an Italian entrepreneur, the president of Saras, an oil company inherited from his father. He had held positions including president of the Petroleum Union and a member of the National Coordination Committee Against the Abuse of Drugs. And he was the maiden supporter of the community of San Patrignano. And I think that this thing, again, they have long lead times. I mean, this is not like it started a little bit earlier than the Harlem Children's Zone, but similar trajectory. Like they started these models really, really soon, really, really early for what's coming. It says he was married twice. His second marriage was Letizia Moratti, a former mayor of Milan. So this is connected, like this entity was connected, had deep contacts. So there's a whole website that talks about this. I think a lot of the information on the website was taken from the transcripts of the court cases that were around suicides and the murder that happened on the site of this. I'll just read a little bit. This is a section called The Recipe of Love. We were in 1979 when a newspaper clipping arrives to the Carabinieri with the words, quote, "I am a prisoner of these people. Call the police or the Carabinieri. I have already had 7 collapses and I am very bad." 27-year-old Paolo Morisoni, undergoing intensive detoxification, had been imprisoned for 4 days. However, the story does not have a continuation because Muccioli will exculpate himself by stating, quote, "Addicts are people capable of understanding but not of will." All right. And so again, this is a way you focus on these marginalized communities and people don't believe them, and you can do all sorts of crap to them because they don't. It's almost like they've been dehumanized. It did not end the same way, however. On another occasion, on October 28, 1980, a 23-year-old girl, Maria Rosa Cesarini, presented herself to the mobile team of Forlì, recounting that she had fled from San Patrignano after being locked up for 16 days in a pigeon loft. When the policemen finally break into the community, they find Luciano Rubini and Leonardo Biagiotti chained in 2 rooms used as a kennel. Marco Marcello Costi chained to an iron door of a room measuring 3 meters by 1, and Massimo Sola chained to an artifact used as a dovecote. All of these people will testify a few days later, all but one, Leonardo Biagiotti, found dead on the railway line in Castelfranco Emilia, bound for Milan, having mysteriously fallen from the train. Vincenzo Muccioli is arrested, that's the guy who ran the thing, with some of his collaborators and imprisoned for a month. The trial will be held 4 years later and will end with a 20-month sentence for Muccioli in the first degree and acquitted on appeal, again, because the guy is connected. But let's come to the testimonies of those who testify in a much more serious trial involving Muccioli, the one for the murder of Roberto Maranzano, murdered in the community pigsty. All right. And this is what Bobby is promoting as like a great place with organic farming and furniture shops. There's a lot of articles about this that came out around the Netflix series. This one, The Rise and Fall of the Anti-Drug Savior. What is the line between therapy and abuse? What is the difference between an autonomous community and a total institution? Do people struggling with addiction have free will? And so I think that these situations are going to be set up, as impact finance sectors. The article goes on to talk about this community seemed like a psychological description of a cult with love bombing, brainwashing, charismatic leaders, strict rules. It said that Muccioli boasts of giving educative beatings to members of the community. He portrayed himself like a father, and it's kind of weird in that I didn't include it in the clip, but Bobby in when he talks about it does almost talk about being a new family or parenting, which seems in line with this Muccioli thing of being the uber father of this community. And it says, what is most staggering is how the film portrays social reactions to the systematic abuse of people. When Escape Girl presents testimony of her kidnapping, abuse, and detention at the hands of Muccioli and his bullies, a criminal investigation begins. And then it goes on to say, but the majority of Italians just said they side with the abuser, and they said, well, those are just junkies. And when they became addicted, they gave away their rights. And this is a quote. It says, it's scary to see how easily people give up the ideas of human dignity and civil liberties when it comes to social groups that are hated and excluded. Despite the evidence of his crimes, Muccioli becomes a celebrity venerated as a saint. This is really scary. Again, I'm not saying that there isn't a need, but it does seem kind of strange that Kennedy would set up this idea of a government sponsored Peace Corps / recovery enterprise, when on the other hand, he's all about autonomy and independence and community. What kind of good care can you give thousands of people, 2,000 people in recovery in one center? That's an institution. That's not, people are not getting personalized attention. That's a work camp. And so this is where it gets quite interesting. This is a sustainable economy forum that's sponsored by the organization, the recovery organization. This is going to be set up as a benefit corporation, right, for impact finance. And they've been having sustainable economy gatherings since 2018. So it's organized by their community. And they had their most recent one on April 13th. So I'm just going to go over, it says the Sustainable Economy Forum, right? And you could kind of hear it when Bobby is saying oh, they do organic farming. Oh, they have a furniture business. Yeah, it's a labor camp. These are the people who are involved. So it's the San Patrignano. They describe it as a home, a large family that has been offering to help young people with addiction for over 40 years. It's welcomed more than 26,000 people. They call them guests. Part of the proceeds derives from San Patrignano goods and services, part from private donors or companies that believe in the social value of the center. Yeah, so it's a social enterprise, right? In fact, they say it's a model social enterprise, and it was recognized in 1997 by the United Nations. Again, Bobby followers, United Nations. As an NGO with special consultative status on drugs with the United Nations Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC. right? So they're in consultation with the UN. The other partner on the sustainable economy is Confindustria, the main association representing manufacturing and service companies in Italy, with a voluntary membership of more than 150,000 companies of all sizes, employing over 5.4 million people. So this is workforce development. This is free labor. Like, I don't understand like how people can't see what this actually is. This is treacherous. Like, this is the new prison industrial complex tied to addiction. And at this most recent thing, there's a long list of speakers. The first one here, we've got Fabio Bonasso, president of the Accenture Foundation. Well, Accenture is right in the middle of programmable money and impact finance. And I'm just going to scroll through the list of speakers. This is for the most recent conference, just so you can see how many people it is. It's a lot. Let's see, Chief CSR Officer Gruppo Brembo and President GT Sustainability Confindustria. Strategic Support Intesa San Paolo. Il Sole 24 Ore, Celli Group, Alber Italia Foundation, Rector Economist, I don't know. There's lots of people from this Confindustria. So they're looking at free labor. The CEO of the E4 Impact Foundation. So here we've got Letizia Moratti. So she's still there. Like, this idea that, that happened in the so far past, and we're not going to talk about all of that bad stuff that happened in the 70s and 80s and 90s. No, that's the same lady, the former mayor of Milan. She's still involved. And then you've got someone, BioAfrique, because I think they're involved in Africa too. And it just goes on and on. Like, these are a lot of BlackRock Italia, right? The country head of BlackRock Italia, Hydraloop, Nestle Italy. This is responsible biorefining and supply. Big Thunder Mining. Well, doesn't all of this say sustainable economy to you? I mean, it just makes your head explode. These were the partners in 2018. So their first year, BMW, Eni, a multinational oil and gas company, Gruppo 24 Ore, a leading Italian multimedia company, IGP Deco, essentially billboards and outdoor advertising, and Intesa San Paolo, one of the main banking groups in the Eurozone. Like, we've got oil, we've got propaganda, we've got banking, we've got cars. None of this says sustainable. It's all fraud. And, here's just an impact. The E4 Impact Foundation Gianmarco Moratti Award, giving out the awards. You can just see this is a very well-connected institution. And it's scary to me that Bobby is promoting this as his example. And again, I'm just going to, I don't know if this is an overreach, but, Italy, there's a lot of ties to the Catholic Church. And I would say, like, in Philadelphia, one of the places that is leading the impact finance in supportive housing is Project Home, Catholic nun, Scullion, Sister Mary Scullion, I think. And yeah, so they're behind this and they're working in the places that are doing recovery. So yeah, like, what is the involvement of the Catholic Church in all of this stuff with this social impact finance? Like, we know that they've had all these social impact finance gatherings. This is just a report from some organization, International Institute for Management Development, based out of Lausanne, Switzerland, where they're talking about San Patrignano and the social dimension of sustainability, a systems approach, right? They literally say it. It's systems engineering. How to address a social need through business, right? Systems, they're engineering people. And it goes on to say, again, the guy who put together the report, is an adjunct professor of leadership and sustainability with this organization. And then the other co-author is a postdoctoral fellow who got a PhD from MIT in sustainable development. But they're talking about the efficacy of this San Patrignano program. And it says, oh, look, it's reduced the Italian government spending on incarceration by $80 million. Well, that's how all the social impact, many of them are use the cost of incarceration as the cost offset, right? So this idea of efficacy and cost offsets, that's a total setup for social impact bonds. And then it says, oh, and it's so good because, they train the people who are in addiction through job workforce development. Again, that's another pay for success impact bond. And it's very hard for drug users to actually have ability to get a job. So they have this revolutionary approach to dealing with people in addiction is through workforce, again, through forced labor camps, a 5-year commitment to forced labor camps in an institution with a history of murder and chaining people to walls that they have a whole Netflix series about, right? And this is what Bobby is like promoting. It's just like, did they not think anyone was going to look? I mean, it's ridiculous. And thank you, Jason, for bringing it to my attention. I just like, but yeah, so they're talking about sustainability being concerned with society, right? And that's what this is about. And it's quite interesting to me. So their legal structure, look, it has like 5 different parts. They have a foundation, they have a social cooperative, they have an agricultural cooperative, they have a school and training association, and then they have a sports association. And so again, and I connected with someone in Florida who had worked for a long time on cooperatives, like authentic cooperatives, but the cooperatives are going to be fed into the impact finance machine too. And this person saw that coming because the social impact investors were after the cooperatives. And once you understand the cooperative in the context of the ant computer in terms of social insects, you can see why they want the cooperatives. Yeah, not just for the impact deals, but for the systems engineering. And they literally talk about it as social systems design. And it's growing. If you go to their website, they have all these news articles about this model being used all over the world. This is one in Port Alberni, which is on Victoria Island in British Columbia. And the article, this is from the fall of 2021. Port Alberni versus, quote, that ogre on the river. An interesting title. A new approach to the opioid crisis's root problems. And I would say, so this is on Vancouver Island, not Vancouver proper, but Vancouver has been a leader in impact finance around the opioid stuff. And I think the guy, Mate, like he's up there too with all the trauma. And that's going to feed into all of these markets in impact finance. But this is a more rural setting. So yeah, so they're going to put people on the farm. And it's based on this San Patrignano model. They talk about in that the residents, the guests, I guess they call them, they work at the business units making wine, cheese, olive oil, furniture, and scarves, right? So you've got the foodie angle, right? You've got, like, I think Jamie Oliver is even mixed up in this, right? You got the Italian, gourmet foodie angle mixed in with forced labor. And it says, oh, well, this is a popular blueprint for addiction recovery. Despite the unusual length of stay, which is 5 years, 5 years hard labor, only a quarter of the entrants failed to complete the program. Like, and I guess in the past, they couldn't complete the program, like they were chained up, right? Or they were murdered. And so here they're talking about setting up, this guy is doing, setting up one in Canada, right? We went there in 2019 and stayed there for 7 days. And now we're going to start with a little farm and we're just going to have 6 people in a small house, right? Well, I have to say, this is starting to sound a lot like the Narcanon stuff, right? It's sounding a little creepy. Like, would you want to be one of 6 people in a little house, remote house with a 5-year commitment and you don't even know, like, are you going to have any say in that? Or are these courts going to be placing people into these programs? It does mention the Netflix series. A recent Netflix series, SanPa, Sins of the Sailor, examines the controversies that cloaked the early years of the program. Again, I would say the same people, 2 of the people are dead, but like the woman, the Milan mayor, is still involved, when it was accused of abusing and forcibly confining some residents, and Vincenzo Muccioli was sentenced to jail for aiding and abetting in the death of a resident, But it's like, yeah, but besides that, I think that was just dramatized, right? And I think if you look at it all together, this is forced labor in the name of sustainability with the largest workforce development, manufacturing interests in the country of Italy. It's just, none of this looks good. Anyway, it says, Mr. Douglas is quick to acknowledge that the therapeutic community idea is not for everybody. Many will balk at giving up their freedom to stay in recovery for such a stretch. So, again, and I'm just going to put this out there because I think, again, I have a lot of concerns around, again, the linking of pay for success finance into psychedelics. I have a clip here of Charles talking about the importance of psychedelics to our healing. And when you've got Peter Thiel, you've got all these people, like, I don't understand how this is all going to become enmeshed with people in addiction and then also psychedelics and all of it being linked to various impact finance deals. But I think it's a little bit of an odd choice that for Bobby, especially if he's like courting the conservative things that, he's brought on board as his philosopher, someone who literally says that, this is how we're going to do it. Like we did. So I'm going to play this.
Without psychedelics, our situation would be hopeless.
So personally, without psychedelics, our situation would be hopeless. Now, again, I understand that different people, I'm not policing people's personal choices on that. And again, I'm not about trying to like rebuild the drug war industrial complex, but I think anyone, even people who advocate for that, have to look around and notice that the push for these substances is over the top and there's something going on that doesn't feel right.
There's certain kinds of healing, certain awakenings that really, they can happen other ways, but this seems like a pretty important way.
Yeah, you can get healing in other ways, but really this is an important way. So like, where does the psychedelics come into like the community treatment protocols?
There's a saying that I have explored way back in some of my early writing called, I said, the illness seeks the medicine. When there is a condition of disharmony, of lack that requires healing, like that condition summons or magnetizes the medicine to it.
So, I think that's a little bit concerning, this idea that if you're in a traumatized situation, you're dealing with these things that like the medicine comes to you, like that doesn't feel like a lot of personal agency, right? You're saying like, oh, well, that's just how it works, right? You get magnetized to the medicine, it shows up, and then that's what you do. Like to me, like, I don't know, I have some questions about that. That seems like that could be really misused.
You could also say the medicine seeks the illness. So it is not coincidence that psychedelics have presented themselves to us at this time.
Now, again, that's an interesting distinction to make. Psychedelics have presented them. It's an ancient practice, right? It isn't that they're just recently presenting themselves to us. It is that they're, at this point, like psychotechnology is being presented to the masses through all of these different media channels, like through all of these different influencers. It didn't just show up, like it's being presented for a reason. And even, Charles talked about like channeling the oversoul, right? Like I clearly kind of that's what he's saying, like between the lines was going on. It's being presented just like the painkillers were being presented by industry for a purpose. And I would conjecture based on looking at what's happening with the decentralized organization, like the systems of emergence, is they're trying to get people under their control in communal settings that they can use these different technologies, these medicinals or these emerging tech, non-surgical BCIs, to access some sort of super collective super intelligence. And I think that that's something that we really need to be thinking about, especially when you've got people promoting these really problematic institutions.
They're here in response to a need and also to a readiness.
Okay, need and readiness. All right. So, I think that's pretty much it. But like, guys, this is a big thing. I mean, if you've got the guy who wants to be president, essentially, again, leveraging his personal story, which I have compassion for, about a person who himself like suffered from addiction, and that experience to promote a globally connected, in the sustainability sector, tied to the UN model that's like essentially upholding work camps that has a really dark past as your model for your Peace Corps of recovery and mental illness, because he did mention mental illness in there too. And he's talking about kids and the youth, right? And then he said that the chronic illness is something he wants to address. Are we just talking about mercury here, Bobby? Or are we talking about mental illness and addiction? And if so, that's a huge growth thing. And like, again, he's talked about everybody give me Bitcoin, right? Send me, I want to be the crypto candidate. I want to be, well, who is that? That's also Peter Thiel, who's also involved in all the psychedelics. There's too many problems with this, guys. There's too many problems. So that's like my big thing. Like, please, like, pay attention to this recovery stuff. It's really scary.